Thank you so much, and congratulations on the week. I think it's really important for us to shed a spotlight on the mining sector, and I hope it's been a good week for all of you so far. Today I'll talk about what Caitlin mentioned, but maybe I'll begin with a bit of a rewind, going back to 2018, when WESK commissioned our first report through PwC to look at the landscape in terms of women entrepreneurs in our country, in Canada. And what became very clear through the research was a validation of what we knew. One, that women-owned businesses are not scaling to the same extent as male-owned businesses. Male-owned businesses are 3.5 times more likely to reach $1 million in revenue. Also, that women-owned businesses tend to be in what we describe more as the traditional sectors, so for insurance, accommodation, hospitality, and not so much in the high profit, high growth sectors, manufacturing and technology. So what clearly is happening is there is what is called the gender entrepreneurship gap as a result of what I just described. The second thing that became evident is that women actually are drivers of economic growth, and women entrepreneurs had contributed $148 billion to the economy in 2012. And if we were to increase the number of women-owned and women-led businesses by another 10%, that would add another $50 billion to the economy. So when we talk about gender equality and equity, yes, this is about closing the gap in terms of gender equity and equality, but really it's also about economic growth in our country and in our province. And the third thing that was validated through the research was that you're probably asking the question, why is it that women entrepreneurs are not scaling to the same extent? And I'm going to identify the top 3 barriers that came through. One is lack of access to capital. And that can be in terms of, going to a bank and being rejected for a loan or financing. And the banks, in all fairness, are addressing that issue, have made some headway. But when we did the study, rejection rates for women were at about 66% compared to about 34-35% for men. The other thing with women-owned businesses, women are less likely to go and seek financing. They tend to rely on their own internal finances and their savings. As a result, female-owned businesses are often undercapitalized, and therefore, they can't diversify as much. They can't develop new product. They can't expand. They can't hire. So it's a bit of a cycle over there. The second barrier was access to networks. And this might seem very simple and plain, but access to networks, in fact, are becoming crucial in supporting women's scale. Women are not plugged into networks where decisions are made about financing, where decisions are made around what businesses, should be invested in. And that really puts women-owned enterprises at a disadvantage. In fact, the study have made a direct link between women that are plugged into networks and access to capital, and that those that were plugged in had better access to capital. As a result of some of these findings, WESK advocated to the government of Saskatchewan to create an advisory committee to look at the gender entrepreneurship gap in our province. In May of 2019, Mr. Tina Baudry-Miller announced the creation of a WESK-led Saskatchewan Advisory Committee to examine the gap and to make recommendations on closing the gap. Some of you may be familiar. If you're not, please go on our website. There's a group of 12 people who are on this advisory committee, stellar entrepreneurs, also includes a venture capitalist firm. We're looking at this issue right now, and of course, we were, of course, the work was stalled a little bit through COVID, but they're expecting to release the final report from the work of this committee at the end of June. The committee focused on 3 pillars. One is access to capital and networks. 2 was creating awareness around women entrepreneurs in our province, and 3 was looking at influencing policy and what policy changes can be made to support a better business climate for women to scale. what we did through the work of that committee, and what became clear through the work of the committee, was that we needed data that was specific to Saskatchewan. So although we were able to extrapolate data from the national study, it was important to get a pulse on what is going on in Saskatchewan. So we released the Saskatchewan data during Women Entrepreneurs Week, the week of May 18th. And I'm just going to highlight a few findings, and then I hope we can just have a dialogue. And happy to take questions after. I think what is really important for people in Saskatchewan to know is that women-led businesses contributed $23.1 billion to the GDP in 2019 and created 192,000 jobs. Two, in terms of size and share of businesses in our province, over 80% of women-led businesses in our province have under 10 employees. So they're fairly small in size. And not surprisingly, women are less likely to lead a business as the size of the business increases. In relation to financial performance, women-led businesses with 1 to 49 employees have lower revenues than men-led businesses. And then in terms of sectoral composition, there's a predominance, as I mentioned earlier, of women-owned businesses in certain sectors. And in this instance, it was healthcare, social assistance, and national security. In terms of city of location, 24% of the businesses were located in Saskatoon, 20% in Regina, and then less than 4% in the remaining cities. Women-led businesses in Regina are larger in comparison to women-led businesses in Saskatoon. And women-owned businesses tend to be headquartered in Saskatchewan more often than men-led businesses. So one thing I do have to preface this with is this study was done in March, so March 2020, so this was pre-COVID. And so we believe it's important for us to have this data so we can benchmark against this data in the future. In terms of implications for our province, and what does this mean for our province? Given that 80% of women-owned businesses have under 10 employees, it's really important for us to develop a dedicated strategy to support this segment of our community to get through crisis and to recovery and then sustaining the business. We all know that the health economy is going to be a big driver of future growth. And given that there's a predominance of women entrepreneurs in the health sector, we should really be examining opportunities to leverage this predominance in the health sector. And given that women-owned businesses are labor intensive and therefore have a greater propensity to create jobs, we examine how we can support, in our province, how we can support women entrepreneurs scale their business. Like I said, you know, this will be a benchmark because it was done pre-COVID. And I think there are some things that we can address coming out of this study and linking it to the work of the advisory committee. So I'll pause there and maybe we can have a dialogue, and I'm happy to take questions at this time.
Prabha, I wonder if I could maybe start by asking one of the questions. Pam Schwan here with Saskatchewan Mining. Can you hear me?
Pam.
Hi.
Yes, hello, Pam.
Hi, thanks firstly for coming on. I'm just wondering, does the report break down by different sectors? You mentioned there's lots in the health sector. Is there a mining sector or a data at all on that? And maybe if you could provide some comment on what you think specifically, you know, or what might be some specific barriers to mining, or how we could have more women suppliers in our, or businesses owned by women in our supply chain.
Yeah, and I think there might be a mining sector, and I think that, you know, really the research reflects a predominance in other sectors, not in mining, not in manufacturing, not very much in technology, although that's changing. I believe that the elimination of barriers to mining, to women getting into mining sector, would be similar to other sectors, Pam. What is it that what is it, what are we teaching young people in school? What are the careers that we are positioning them for? What is it we are gravitating towards as a community and as a society? And we're seeing a bit of a shift in the tech sector. And how can we make that kind of a shift happen, for example, in mining or in manufacturing? Much of the shift in tech sector has come from small success stories. And now we've got to a point pre-COVID where we have major VCs and major investment companies putting and investing money in companies based out of Saskatchewan. And so how can we create something like that in mining? And that would be a larger conversation that we need to delve into. But I think all of us, including your organization, has a critical role to play in positioning mining as one of those sectors.
Prabha, Pam, Steve McClellan here from the Saskatchewan Chamber. Great presentation, Prabha. And Pam, congratulations to all of you and your colleagues on a very successful mining week. Pam, you referenced the supply chain. And I think as we've learned over the last 3 months, supply chains are critical, and the redundancies that we have there, we may have not built in. But I think also there's some great capacity in Saskatchewan that we're not utilizing as broadly, and it's great capacity within the mining sector. I see people like Veronique is on. I know, Pam, the credentials you have, the education that you have. There's a whole lot of expertise that we could have in our supply chain used by not just the mining sector, but certainly for today's discussion. Lots of expertise that could be utilized more fully. So I would encourage, and anything we could do at the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce to assist, we would, but I would encourage a very strident conversation between not just women entrepreneurs, but women in business generally. And there's lots of leaders across the list of names I'm seeing here today, to say, what's the expertise that's out there? And let's, whether it's a supplier or a human services kind of an expertise, that could be safety training, could be human resources, could be Indigenous engagement. There's all kinds of expertise that have women leaders in leadership roles within those companies that we should start to do more. Mining, because it's so critical to our economy, is not going away. It is going to be there for a long time. And I would just encourage a conversation more broadly than we've had in the past, perhaps, to try and link those two. The supply chain now often takes us out of province, I think, to get some of that expertise. And I know every single week I'm hearing of more great Saskatchewan female entrepreneurs and experts in this, in a variety of fields, but that we need to engage into our supply chain much more actively. So thanks again, Prabha, for the presentation. And I'm always good at giving ideas for others to do work, but I think this would be valuable work to be done.
Thank you, Steve. I think you bring up a great point, because I think there's an opportunity for business leaders, including your organization, to come together to perhaps build a very Saskatchewan-focused supplier diversity policy. And I think the time is right, given COVID. We are looking at our supply chains. So if we can come together to have that conversation and put into effect some policy changes, WESK would love to be part of that. I see a question here. Is it realistic for women-led business within Saskatchewan to actually be able to get financing? My company is involved in production of environmental and agriculture equipment and retail of that equipment to the world mining, oil and gas. I'm trying to read this question here. So I think the question is, how realistic is it to get financing for somebody that is in this sector, and that's environmental and agriculture equipment and retail? You should be able to, I'm saying you should be able to get financing, but it's not going to be easy. I think the banks, the traditional lending institutions, let me use that word. The traditional lending institutions, almost all of the major banks have actually invested billions of dollars in developing a strategy to finance female-led businesses. Now, I know that when rubber hits the road, I've heard stories that may not necessarily be translating into practice, but in many instances that is happening. So I encourage women-owned businesses to go to the banks, but hey, first come to WESK because we provide loans up to 150,000. And then if your project is much larger than the 150,000, then we'll work with other lenders so you can secure the financing you need. But those are the sectors we want to see more women start their businesses in. So this is Daga's Sunset. Encourage you to make inroads or come and see WESK, and then we can provide some guidance.
Hi, Prabha, Veronique here.
Hello, Veronique.
Hi. Quick question. So the MER, which I believe is the mining HR organization, also conducts surveys, I think every couple of years or every 3 years. Have you had any conversation with them to see how your survey, which is particularly geared at entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, and they deal mainly with women in mining, have you had conversation with them to see how your research and theirs correlate, and if there are things that you can cooperate with?
No, great idea. We haven't, but I would love to have that conversation with them and probably have this conversation based on the data we've released with probably other sectors like manufacturing and those other sectors where we don't have a predominance of, female-owned businesses. So thank you for that. I will follow up.
Yeah, it's MER. I forget exactly what the acronym is, but I can probably shoot you an email afterwards. Or yes, maybe if Pam is on the call still, maybe she can put it in the chat.
So it's the Mining Human Resources, right?
Yeah, it's MER, M-I-R-H-R or something like that. I'll look it up right away. I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds great.
It's the Mining Industry Human Resource Council. You're right, Vero. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Thanks, Sam.
It's in the chat. Yeah. I just think that there may be things that you might be able to partner up, keeping in mind, for example, what was just mentioned about, promoting actually not only local, but female-led organizations as suppliers for the mining industry.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'll make one more point about the data we released of the report is there's a little bit of the why still. So there might be a follow-up to this data. So for example, why are female-owned businesses more likely to be located in Saskatchewan? Why are they more labor intensive? It's connected to sectors. Why is it that women-owned business in Regina have more scale than women-owned business in Saskatoon? Why is it we don't have more women entrepreneurs in other communities outside of Regina and Saskatoon? And those are opportunities for us to dig a little bit deeper and then put into effect some recommendations that will help build a community.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got another question here. I'm just going to take a quick look. So does the WESK report categorize, this is from Pam, does the WESK report categorize different types of business owned by Saskatchewan entrepreneurs? There may be opportunities to build awareness, and I would be happy to facilitate a meeting with mining procurement personnel. We have historically focused on business owned by Indigenous organizations and entrepreneurs, but diversity includes more women as well. Yes, Pam, I will be all over that. I think to Steve's point earlier, I think it's an important conversation, the supplier diversity conversation in our province. I think the time is right now for us to have that conversation. So let's make that happen.
Hi, Prabha. This is Lisa here. Thank you very much for the presentation. And I think it's great to encourage women, like in entrepreneurship. And one of the big question is for all the women sitting here and like in the province, what can we do, and what we could potentially be done to help women to raise voice in the man-dominant industry like mining.
Yes. So I think that's really important for us to begin our advocacy effort. So some of the comments here today. So while WESK is working in the domain of, working with our membership and sort of being a collective, being a voice for the collective of members that we have who are part of our organization, most of those members are in those traditional sectors. So WESK needs to really connect with organizations like the Mining Association and some of those other sectors where we have fewer women, and look at how we can build a coordinated advocacy strategy that will build awareness, and perhaps then look at some things that can be implemented to increase the number of women participating in those sectors. So the Saskatchewan Advisory Committee that I referenced earlier was not looking at any particular sector, but generally looking at how can women-owned businesses achieve scale, which means they bring in more revenues, they create more jobs, they contribute to economic growth, because women really are drivers of economic growth in our province and in our country, and how do we leverage that? So I think it would be a matter of us working with those different sectors to look at how we can promote a strategy, a coordinated strategy. I've got another question here. I hope I'm not missing questions along the way here. I'm involved, so it's Karen who's asking, I'm involved with women-owned business in mining in Ontario, focused on, oh no, I lost. Okay, so there's somebody asking about, moment. Yes, so this is a question saying, Karen's involved in mining in Ontario, focused on procuring women-owned business professionals, worth connecting and talking to the founder, which I can support, Women on the Move Artemis project. Okay, excellent. That would be a great resource. We have another question. Are we allowed in-person communication with WESK right now, or is it only by email or telephone? It's all virtual, so there is no disruption to our services or programming right now, but it's all virtual. So we can chat with you as soon as you want by phone, or we tend to use video conference as well. I don't see other questions at this point.
Prabha, Steve McClellan here again. For those that don't know, Prabha was the president of the University of Regina Hill School of Business Leaders Council. And the Hill School is doing experts or entrepreneurs in residence, and they're looking for an ag expert to be in residence and so on. Pam, I'm not sure what work has been done this way, but in the business schools, there might be some merit in whether it's a full bore expert in residence for mining. And we certainly have the people, many of them on the call here today would be good candidates for a role like that, to sit with business students, to talk to them, as we've done with, what they're doing with agriculture, they've done it on Indigenous business. It might make sense to think about the business students coming into the world of mining. Certainly the people that are in engineering, geology, the women there know of mining very well, but I think the business students would be well served by that. So whether it's again, an executive in residence type program, or it's more programming to be done there. I remember, those students typically do not have a firm career path. And with the advantage we have as Saskatchewan with such a strong mining sector, getting more of those students, the business students, U of R, U of S, Sask Polytech, First Nations University, learning about it, it again might be a very useful tactic to build these women's careers towards a mining sector role.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Steve. And, you know, I was thinking a precursor to something like that can be developing data that's specific to the mining sector. And so it can be broken out by gender, but you know, then the sector would have the data to go back to the business school and sort of lay out a plan. Yeah, so Pam was just referencing the World Mining Games organized by the UFS. And it's in the 7th year and many women involved. I don't see any more questions here. Caitlin, am I missing anything?
No, it looks like we've caught all of the questions.
Prabha and Caitlin, if I can, it's Pam here again. I think maybe there's some good follow-ups that we can have from this, including Karen, I'm interested in maybe how we can connect maybe some of our procurement with the Ontario Women, the Artemis Project, and also with WIM on maybe working with Prabha on maybe some specific opportunities in the mining sector per se, but maybe there's some follow-up that we can do specifically in drawing in all those threads. And Karen, I'm wondering if Cover Gals is involved in that Artemis project. Do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. We're all part of a big group there.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I've been involved with the project just over, probably just over a year, I guess, and started out with it just being, you know, provision of additional sales and marketing training, but it has grown into a much larger program where we are all talking to each other about collaborating on different projects, depending on what the needs of different projects are. We have options for individual support for marketing. We have, we do delegation meetings with major mining organizations. These primarily have fallen in Toronto because that's where they're based, but they are not just supporting Ontario-based business, obviously. I'm probably the first that came outside of Ontario, but they had piloted the program in South America as well. So there's quite a pool of ladies with women with their own businesses, and some of them have quite a few personnel as well, and a whole spectrum of business types. And we're kind of global, so they're trying to grow that organization to support basically increasing the level of procurement of women-owned business.
That's a great project and a great resource. So WESK would be very interested in learning more about that one. So Pam, do you, going back to sort of the data for mining and also recommendations around presence in the universities, any additional thoughts on that from your perspective, Pam? And also, do you know, is there an opportunity to dig deeper into the mining sector and perhaps even the unique barriers that women may experience in that particular sector?
Oh, for sure, I think so. I don't think we have very good data right now on our supply chain in terms of procurement. Our understanding of Indigenous owned businesses is pretty good because that's where our focus is. So I'm thinking if we can maybe broaden that focus and get the data to start is helpful. But I think there's probably some, you know, we could look at doing that, but some more discussion. I was struck by Karen's use of the word collaboration early on in her description of the Artemis project. So very much, I think, you know, we can definitely have follow up fairly shortly after to maybe scope some things out with some of our procurement leaders. But I am curious about whether your study also looks at how women operate very differently in terms of collaborating versus men-owned businesses, where I'm not sure collaboration is really a strong suit.
Yeah, so our study did not address that issue, but I have read a lot of work on that particular piece. And one of the things that has been highlighted about women working together and women-owned businesses who are actually competing in the same space will collaborate much more than male-owned businesses in the same sector. And you would see this quite, it's quite vivid, particularly say in the hair salon industry, for example, and you'd find a lot of the owners of different hair salons that likely are competing with each other are actually part of a similar network, mentor each other, support each other. And it's quite unique what you see with women-owned businesses. I think there's a real, people are really thirsty for mentors and for role models. And because our community is so small, I find that there's a lot of collaboration and support and really championing the other person's success.
Yeah, let's follow up sooner than later on this. And I just actually want to, my last remark is going to be to acknowledge the role that women in mining and women in nuclear play in actually being a great support for each other in the sector, and broadening actually the support for the mining sector. And I'm a big believer in collaboration and not in duplicating things. So I would sort of open up the invitation for other organizations to work with us on this.
That's a great idea. Well, maybe I'll just make a final comment that, you know, the data is out there. So there's the national data that from 2018, there's a Saskatchewan data from 2020 from March. I know we may dig a little deeper into some of the why behind some of the data that we have in the second report, but also stay tuned for the release of the report from the Saskatchewan Advisory Committee on supporting women scale their business in Saskatchewan. That's due to be released end of June, and there might be some more information there that perhaps we can partner on or with the mining sector.